So for our last session, we're going to mix it up a little bit. Instead of having a panel, we'll have a series of speakers. Our 4 speakers are current fellows in the Veterans Advanced Energy Fellowship. The fellowship is something that we started 3 years ago. It is a year-long leadership and policy development program. Applications are currently open for the next cohort through next week, August 15th. As you look at the requirements, you'll see there is no minimum military service, no experience requirement, no specific education requirements, because we are looking for a diversity of everybody that's coming out of the military. We're looking for idea makers, for passionate people, and people who are going to make a big difference in the community and building this community. So the plan here, the program, I'll invite each speaker to the stage. They have about 5 minutes for a flash talk or like a mini TED talk. We'll come back for some questions after. So if a question strikes you, because we're on a tight timeline, line right up to the mic there. Otherwise, I have some questions for them as well. And with that, I'd like to invite Jennifer Momfrey.
All right, what a great honor it is to be here. I am Jennifer Momfrey. I am a U.S. Army veteran, and I currently work in clean transportation at a nonprofit called CalSTART. I would like to talk about leveraging the Department of Defense procurement to address climate and competition by putting rare earth minerals at the top of the shopping list. Slide. The largest ground war in Europe since World War II has resuscitated the idea that we really don't want to be tied to a global fossil fuel market. Slide. This is not a new idea. Every president since I was born has made this a key talking point. And yes, I know that's a lot of presidents. Is this time different? I say potentially yes. Slide. Commercially available clean tech is ready to facilitate the transition. The bipartisan infrastructure legislation is bringing $65 billion to the table to build lots of clean techs in our communities, in our cities, and in our states. And I didn't forget the $379 billion, right? But even with all this, there is a sizable gap that does need attention, because the basic building block of these technologies and in the clean energy economy is rare earth minerals. Wind turbines, solar cells, and battery cells used in electric vehicles and in stationary storage, they use up pretty much an alphabet soup from the periodic table. So here they are. Now, contrary to the moniker, rare earth minerals really aren't that rare. In fact, most of them are quite plentiful, even here in the United States. But they don't arrange themselves in nice, thick bands through quartz. Instead, they're dispersed. They're not very concentrated. And so it makes it very difficult to source, and they are very expensive. But other countries have become very fast movers in these markets. And some of the largest suppliers of these rare earth minerals are contenders for the title of bad actor in the global community. Slide. For example, so the standard lithium-ion battery, which I deal with a lot because I deal in zero-emissions transportation, has basically 4 rare earth minerals at its core: lithium, nickel, cobalt, and magnesium. And as you can see, checking the leaderboard, who's up there? China and Russia. It is time for the US to catch up. However, compared to other countries who are pursuing an aggressive, full economy approach to this, the US, and we heard about this earlier, kind of has a piecemeal approach, touching here, touching there, leaning heavily on the private sector, which is recovering from COVID, and also is dealing with inflationary pressures. Next slide. So it's time to call in the cavalry, call in the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard too, because the current piecemeal approach really cannot shift the supply chain in time in the same way that the Department of Defense can. Slide. By leveraging DoD research, procurement, and contracting, and applying them to the whole spectrum of clean tech, the supply chain, including rare earth minerals, slide, the U.S. can secure these strategic resources and power up the market and the industries that supply them. Slide. What is required is for policymakers to prioritize funding and approve initiatives that directly link to our own rare earth mineral supply chain and the clean technologies that they support. It is time to move beyond the Army pilots that dabble in the deployment of non-combat electric vehicles and past the slow but steady testing of microgrids at Marine bases. We need big initiatives across all of the services. We need more than a market signal. What we need is a national call to arms. This will move investments off the sidelines, and as a bonus, and a very important one, the DoD can apply requirements to ensure that supply chain operations and the sourcing are built with safety and sustainability as a core. Because that's something that, honestly, we all know would take years for regulators in the private sector to litigate, right? Next slide. Today's geopolitical environment and the increasing impacts of climate change will not allow us enough time to allow the commercial market to grow domestic capacity and supplies in its own time. It is time to use the power and the might of the U.S. Department of Defense to build and defend the rare earth mineral and related clean tech industries here at home. It is time to align our national and our energy security with our nation's climate strategy while ensuring global competitiveness for the future. Thank you.
Jen, stay with me here.
Well, we've got questions.
Yeah, so anybody have questions for Jen, please find yourself at the mic. I do want to ask, what is the Department of Defense doing today? What are they doing right that you want to see more of?
Sure. You know, it was really interesting doing this and looking at this as by policy because as I was talking with some of my other fellows, like it was moving so fast. And so I was like, this is my policy, and then something would happen. Okay, no, this would change. And so, so during the spring, those of you that follow us probably know that within the IIJA, but also within the Defense Appropriation Act, there were movements to really look at rare earth minerals. And you'll see a lot of compliments with, oh, just like the silicon chips, we've got to make sure that this happens. And so, so there is funding that is out there. Kind of mining industries are waiting for those grants. The national laboratories are looking for those grants to be coming as that money kind of doles out. So I wouldn't say that it's being ignored. But the thing is that the problem is just so vast. And even with, I would say maybe this isn't the solution piece, but another piece of the gap is that even within the negotiations, as much as last week, during the negotiations about the, I call it the Reconciliation Act because that's what I've been talking about for so long. But even with that, you'll find OEMs, manufacturers of electric vehicles, who did not want the Buy America standards put in there, right? Because they don't feel that they can be competitive because it's not ready. And so this is really that next step is like, okay, like our private sector companies need to still depend on foreign sources. So let's not handicap them. Let's use the Department of Defense to build that up while they can compete in the global market at the same time.
Thank you. Let's hear it for Jennifer. Next, I'll bring up Kendall Ryan.
I'll attempt it. Well, let's see how that works with these.
Do you want me to click for you?
No, I'll try. I'll just leave it here. Hello, everybody. My name is Kendall Ryan, and today I propose to you how the Department of Defense can lead the U.S. transition to renewable energy. How DoD can proactively use their lands to help deploy 2 terawatts of wind and solar to mitigate our climate crisis. And we have a climate crisis. It's a national security threat impacting food and water availability, displacing people from their homes, and as many of the speakers talked about today, impacting military operations. More than 30 bases are facing increased risk from higher sea levels, and many others are being impacted by natural disasters with increased severity over the past. We need clean energy to address this climate crisis, and we need these clean systems now. the President's administration has set a goal of 100% clean electricity by 2035. And as you can see from this graph, we have a long way to go to get there. All of this clean energy will take a lot of space, and fortunately, DoD has that. As the 5th largest land management agency, it manages over 8.8 million acres, an area the size a little bit larger than the state of Maryland. DoD can use this space to accelerate deployment by proactively planning for renewables. Proactive planning starts with systematic assessments to site renewable projects. DoD does not currently have a framework for proactive planning of renewables. Instead, it's reacting to developers' requests. Developers are bringing those requests to the services and DoD for approval, and as part of that process, the clearinghouse is assessing military mission compatibility. But that's not the whole picture. It's just one aspect. Proactive planning means assessing potential, includes all these other aspects, including the resource potential, as you can see here, where solar potential is overlaid with military bases, and supporting the infrastructure needed as well. Proactive planning and assessments also includes economic viability and sustainability, including environmental and social aspects, in addition to that military mission compatibility that I spoke to before. Using DoD lands for renewable projects is not a new concept. Photovoltaics, wind farms, and a geothermal facility are currently in operation. And in 2020, over 2,000 projects were in operation. So with these projects, there's an established framework for land management and energy production and sale. And this leads to the value added for DoD. There are economic opportunities, including payments for leased lands and revenue from energy production. Increased energy security and resilience that a couple speakers talked about earlier today as well, for both the individual installations and more at the national level. And DoD would be seen as a leader in the whole of government approach towards the US goal of 100% clean electricity, an approach advocated for by the administration. The Department of Defense need not react to developers, but proactively plan for renewables by conducting systematic assessments on their lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra. I let you all off easy with Jennifer, but really we would like to hear questions from the audience if you have them. So as you think, as you listen, please step on up. Kendra, I do want to ask you, for the way that the House is currently working, what kind of problems is that creating within the industry and for siting these projects on DoD lands?
So the clearinghouse is responsible for assessing impacts, how it may affect mission compatibility, and then they are proposing mitigating terms or minimizing the risk and hopefully not canceling the project. But again, that doesn't get to the heart of it, which is that DoD needs to be more proactive in assessing more the complete picture, not just military mission compatibility.
And we're talking about projects on DoD property. Is this for powering military bases only, or how does this apply to the private industry who also probably wants to build public-private partnership projects?
Exactly, both. It could be for internal usage or for public-private partnerships. Somebody mentioned it here today. When Texas grid goes down, a base can supply energy to the surrounding community. So it comes in many options, but the point is that DoD needs to understand its resource and how that can best benefit our communities and ultimately our national goals.
All right, Kendra, seeing no other questions, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone.
All right, next up we have Alexis Shannon. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexis Shannon. I'm here today to tell you how offshore wind represents an exciting and potentially transformational opportunity for the state of California, but why the state needs to enact strong policy support in order to turn that opportunity into a reality. So while stationed in San Diego during my time in the Navy, I spent a number of days navigating in the beautiful coastal waters of California. This is when I experienced firsthand that the wind just offshore is incredibly strong and consistent. While standing watch on the bridge of my destroyer, I remember always having to take note of the wind speed and direction while we conducted training exercises like man overboard drills, live fire events, or flight operations. California, of course, is home to one of the best offshore wind resources in the entire world. It's so windy that the National Renewable Energy Lab estimates that the total offshore wind potential, which is over 200 gigawatts, is more than enough to easily supply the entire state's peak electrical load. In order to take advantage of this abundant renewable resource, the state should pass legislation that sets an offshore wind procurement target of no less than 20 gigawatts by 2045. While 20 gigawatts is just a fraction of the total potential, it's big enough to drive the economies of scale needed to bring down costs and to incentivize the creation of a brand new offshore wind industry on the West Coast. There is precedent for this type of state support. California has been a champion for renewable energy technology development, and it once played a leading role in growing the onshore wind industry. Thousands of wind turbines, like the one shown here near Palm Springs, were installed as early as the 1980s. However, since then, most of the onshore wind locations in the state have already been developed. So for the past decade or so, California has relied very heavily on solar power for new projects. By relying too much on solar, however, the California grid, even this year, has already reached the point where there's too much solar power during the middle of the day, and then there's a rapid shortfall in the evening and at night. So as you can see in this figure, as the sun sets and solar power rapidly declines, the price of energy skyrockets because that drop in solar has to be met with a corresponding ramp up of dirty fossil fuel peaker plants. Offshore wind, though, the blue line here, can play an important complement to solar power by peaking in the evening and holding steady throughout the night. So not only can offshore wind generate during the most valuable times of the day, it also has a higher capacity factor, which means it's steadier, stronger, and more reliable than other competing wind resources. Because of this, a state modeling report has actually found that a future grid that incorporates offshore wind is more reliable, more efficient, and cheaper than a grid without offshore wind. So in addition to producing abundant, affordable, clean energy, there are a host of other benefits that offshore wind development will bring to California. As we've already seen in Europe, and we're beginning to see now on the East Coast, offshore wind projects generate millions of dollars in tax revenue that support local coastal communities. They encourage manufacturing and jobs to come to the state, in fact, tens of thousands of jobs, especially jobs suited for veterans, like we've been talking about. And they bring much-needed investments in port infrastructure and manufacturing. Offshore wind, of course, is also less vulnerable to one of the dangerous threats facing the state. As we've seen in the news over the past several years, wildfires have ravaged California, and unfortunately, the threat is only growing due to prolonged drought and higher temperatures. We now know, in fact, that many of the most devastating fires in recent history were started by sparks from electric transmission lines. While many other types of renewable energy projects will require new transmission to be built across areas of high fire risk, offshore wind can mitigate this risk because offshore wind farms can connect directly to coastal cities with undersea cables. So if offshore wind has all these benefits and advantages, why are there 0 turbines in the waters off California right now? Why do we need a procurement target? One of the main reasons is that the very deep waters of the Pacific require wind turbines to be installed on floating foundations like the one shown here. Floating wind technology is still in the early stages of development, but with strong state policy support, they can bring down costs just like we've seen with onshore wind and with solar. Besides this technological challenge, offshore wind projects also require massive investments in ports, manufacturing, transmission, and workforce training that are often too big for any one developer to solve by themselves. So to illustrate the impact of strong policy support for offshore wind, just take a look at the difference in the East Coast and the West Coast in offshore wind project activity. Many states along the East Coast have already enacted different state policies that support offshore wind development. And as you can see, that's helped to accelerate dozens of projects and bring in billions of dollars of investment. California, even though it has a stronger wind resource than the East Coast, lags way behind in developing its offshore wind industry. You can see here that 8 different states along the Mid-Atlantic and New England have already enacted specific offshore wind procurement targets, whether through mechanisms like power purchase agreements or offshore renewable energy credits. My proposal is actually quite simple. It's for California to follow these examples, and in doing so, they can lead the way for the West Coast to enact similar policies. So if California wants to benefit from all the advantages that offshore wind can bring to the state, it needs to enact a statewide procurement goal of no less than 20 gigawatts by 2045. 20 gigawatts is ambitious, but it's achievable, and it's the size needed to drive economies of scale that will bring down costs and encourage companies and investment to come to the state. By making this strong and clear commitment, California can diversify its renewable energy portfolio, it can enhance grid reliability and energy security, and become a leader in floating offshore wind development in the Pacific. Thank you all for your time.
Alex, thank you again. I'll invite people who have questions to the mic to line up here. I do want to ask, what is happening in California already? What exists today? Is it just nothing? No one's talking about this at all?
They're talking about it. Thankfully, they're starting to talk about it. And actually, last year we saw exciting development with what's called Assembly Bill 525. But what that does essentially is it directs the California Energy Commission, sort of the state energy research agency, to simply create a planning target and to study the potential for offshore wind development in the state. And so my proposal is that studying the target is not enough, and that the logical next step would be an actual procurement target.
Chris?
Hey, Alex, great presentation. Are floating wind turbines, do they exist now, or are they?
These right here are floating wind turbines.
Okay.
This is a pilot project off the coast of Portugal, so there are several pilot projects like this. So we already know the technology works. It's just a matter now of bringing it to scale and bringing down costs.
Yeah, Alex. A lot of innovation has come in different places from the CCAs, which are like trying to get out of the fixed utilities. Is there any interest from the CCAs in this? Because I know that they've had a really hard time with community solar. Would this be an option, and have they expressed any interest?
I don't have personal experience with CCAs. However, what I've gathered is that because CCAs tend to be smaller than state-owned utilities like we have on the East Coast, for example, in some ways it's probably more difficult for them to contract for this offshore wind energy because these plants are in the gigawatt scale. When they put out RFPs, they're looking for 100, 200 megawatts. And most of the time, that's going to come from solar. So I didn't get into the specifics of how the legislation would work in California, but it would likely involve some sort of central procurement authority so that the state would buy or contract for the offtake and then distribute that somehow financially to the CCAs. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Who's opposed and why?
Excellent question. Of course, many industries, notably fishing, though of course that's not unique to California. We've already seen that on the East Coast. And of course there are ways to develop responsibly. Of course, we're not going to build out the full 200 gigawatts because that would take away from the other coastal uses that we cherish in California. So fishing for sure. Of course, there are important environmental concerns as well. That would be part of the surveying activities and part of the construction and operation plans that any developer submits to ensure that we're not damaging the environment, that we're being good stewards. So those are the main ones that I can think of, but do you have any others in mind?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Alex.
Well, thanks all.
So for our last talk, I'll bring up Kevin Dauphin.
The state of Texas is a leader in energy. We're the capital of the world for energy for a lot of cases. And it's not just what's below the ground. When people think of Texas, they think of oil and gas. It's also what's above. So when you think of it, it's wind, it's solar, it's the oil and gas. We started 100 years ago with the discovery of oil in Spindletop outside of Beaumont, the shale boom in East Texas that bled over into South Texas and West, as well as wind and solar. We're the #1 state for wind, and we'll fast approach and take over California as the #1 for solar. Next, we need to invest in geothermal policy, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about. And there's only two things you really got to know to make this happen. We need to deregulate, we need to invest. Two things that Texans love to do. If there's anything we love more than anything, it's deregulating. You can just look at our grid. It's a perfect example. I come from Texas. My name's Kevin Dauphin. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer with Clean Energy Services. We're an O&M provider for large-scale wind and energy storage. Now, when we're talking about geothermal, we're talking about 24/7 clean baseload power, something that is secure, and energy security equals national security. This is a very simple technology. You heard Kendra talk about it a little bit earlier. You're basically just bringing the hot water out of the ground that's deep down, not much different than what we do already with our natural gas and oil drilling. It's a lot bigger hole. You bring it to the surface, the steam releases, and then you turn a turbine. Same way we do with natural gas, coal, or nuclear. So this is a very safe, stable technology that has not really been invested in. And the reason we haven't invested in it is because we try to follow a capital structure that is primarily developed and used for existing technologies. When we look at the cap structure for geothermal that's been tried to be deployed over the last few decades, we ignore the fact that we need a government involvement. It's a public-private partnership that sets the stage and incubates these systems. If you look at shale drilling, it was created by George Mitchell in East Texas, and that's the story we always talk about in Texas. But they don't talk about all the money that the Department of Energy put into it through non-dilutive grant funding to build up that technology base. And it was amazing. It stimulated the economy, it stimulated workforce, it made us the #1 producer and exporter of LNG and oil and gas in the world. Wind and solar. In the late 90s, under George Bush, we built out the CREZ line, which is basically just a very large transmission network, a superhighway for electrons to get them from West Texas to where we consume the power in major baseload centers in our metropolitan areas. It was a build it and they will come strategy, and it worked. The same way when you have a growing metropolitan area and a city, a county, a state, to incentivize their tax base, they're going to go ahead and build out a big freeway, and then land developers come in and will build a subdivision. In the same way, by building out this infrastructure, they incentivize wind developers to come in and build out these massive wind farms, and it worked. And the $6 billion that went into it has netted 10x for the state. You can see when we started the CREZ line in the early 2000s, wind quickly ramped up. And in 2013, they finished the CREZ line and the curtailment issue dropped. Now we're starting to run into curtailment issues again because we don't have enough transmission again, which there are a lot of really great providers that are working on that problem. Now, for the two things you need to know on investing and deregulating right now, unlike oil and gas, which can be permitted in months, geothermal will take years. And for a novel technology, even though it's existed for a while, to have years of project financing soaked up as you just try to get through the permitting is unacceptable. There's no way that we can get through this. And right now, who holds that? It's the Railroad Commission of Texas. And if you're not from Texas and you're not familiar with this group, it has nothing to do with railroad tracks, but what's underneath them. Oil, gas, all the extraction of the minerals and assets in our state, and geothermal policy falls underneath them. So we need to lobby the Railroad Commission to make these changes. Now, on the investment side, what we're proposing is an amendment to the Natural Resource Code. This would allow the Railroad Commission to accept federal funds, which they are technically not allowed to accept at this time. By doing so, we can take that non-dilutive funding that came through DOE that stimulated the shale boom and be able to create an investment fund for geothermal. The problem with geothermal is we try to do this through this typical mechanism, like I mentioned, of how we conventionally go out for exploration and production activities. But it takes a lot longer, and so it doesn't fit the project profile. If we can set up a fund that does dollar-to-dollar matching after $10 million, which succeeds in making sure that this isn't fly-by-night, these are people actually going out and raising project capital, we can sustain and develop a really fast-growing momentum on these projects. And through deployment-led innovation, we can drive down the cost curve, just like we did with wind and solar. Kendra brought up earlier about the DoD role in this. Right now, the first pilot project for geothermal is being built on Ellington Field south of Houston by Sage Geothermal under a grant through the Air Force. And we need a renewable energy coordination office. One of the pushbacks the last time a bill was pushed to enact some of these things, well, we don't have the expertise and it's going to cost $1 million a year in staffing. We needed an actual office that can be tied adjacent or underneath the Railroad Commission to actually handle the permitting, the investment structure, and due diligence that's associated with this. We have the expertise for oil and gas. We lack that appropriately for geothermal. So as we go through this, I want you to, if anybody here is in Texas, reach out to your legislator in the state. The Energy Resources Commission or Committee is the one that oversees this. With executive sponsorship of a new bill in the next legislative session, we can make this happen. And with your support, I think we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Again, questions for the mic. I want to know, this seems to me like a nonpartisan issue, something that we should see support from both sides of the aisle. Is that true? Is it simply a bureaucratic issue, or do you see political divide on this?
There's some push because the last time this was pushed through, it was Democrat-led. And so the chairman of the committee is Republican, so immediately there's that cutting against the grain. But honestly, it's more of a bureaucratic issue. We do things the way we do things, and now you want to change it. Everyone who's served in the military has experienced this at one point or another. So it's really just a matter of change management, more than it is political divide or resistance.
Question to the mic.
Hey, Kevin. Great job.
Thanks.
Question. So with all the solar and the wind and the oil and the gas, where does geothermal fit into Texas' energy mix? And can you tell us a little bit about what the available resource is and how that would compare to other parts of the country, and why Texas is a good place to start?
Sure. So in geothermal, you're looking for fairways. So a lot of the geothermal research that was done in most of the country, and especially Texas, was done after the oil crisis in the 70s, when they started to say, as well as solar, hey, maybe we shouldn't be tied to an energy source as our primary power gen that we don't control and is handled by, petrostates. Having served in Iraq, I can feel that pain. So there are these really good fairways in South Texas where we already have existing drilling infrastructure in place. And so what you basically have to do is you use the geothermal as a base load to offset the predictable intermittency of renewables, as well as 60% of the down power during the freeze when my baby had to sleep on me because you can only put so many blankets on a 1-year-old. 60% of that lost power was natural gas. Had nothing to do with renewables. So having this without having to worry about the pipelines coming in and the weatherization, the freezing, you actually have a more stable baseload generation power capacity. However, again, we don't have the financial instruments to properly monetize geothermal. What is a clean electron worth? Wind and solar have to compete competitively against any other power gen. But if you're doing 24/7 clean baseload, do we put a premium on that? Do we treat that differently? And right now, the answer is no.
Hi, Kevin. Yeah, excellent job. Maybe just kind of piggyback off that question. I'm not that familiar with geothermal power in general, but I can imagine that different geologies support it. Some parts of the country are better than others. Is Texas the best place to start? And maybe you can just go into a little bit of the science behind what are you looking for in the land, the physical land, as an ideal place for a geothermal plant.
Yeah, so the thing you also have to think about with geothermal is there's actually multiple use cases. We're just talking about power gen right here, but there's also district heating and just heating uses. And also because there's a temperature differential, you can use it for cooling as well. This goes back to our earlier conversation about heat pumps. It's just a heat exchange mechanism. So the largest and longest running geothermal operation is the geysers in California. So, this is where you think of like the natural geysers in state parks. So you have a really high level heat differential close to the surface. You're almost just picking up the power right off of it. In Texas, it's not the ideal or best heat resource, but it is a good heat resource. When you think about residential, that gets a little bit trickier based on land use. You got to be further out. It's hard to do it inside of tight urban pockets. But Texas has sufficient capacity to do it. There's a ton of momentum in the state. The leading geothermal trade group is based out of Austin. Neighbors Drilling has partnered with Sage Geosystems. Patterson UTI, which is another E&P company, is partnered with Criterion. So there's a lot of momentum already happening inside of Houston that leverages the existing base of industry knowledge and technology. We have an existing base that's been installed for decades and have been operating for a really long time. This isn't that hard. We kind of just have to take more of a business approach rather than an environmental approach to how we solve this. If we all make money, trust me, everyone's going to keep wanting to keep doing it.
Thank you, Kevin.